Coming back to McMurray and the Morocco's dependency on Europe, I found it online here. This is from uh, from Google Books. Um, Hadu had been invited to to Germany. Unlike the better organized, more demanding European workers, migrants could be made to work harder and longer, do dirtier, more dangerous jobs, greater profits. As Hadu saw it, the real dilemma was that the Moroccans were dependent on Europe no matter what they did. They could stay home, and if they were lucky enough to find a job at all, produce products for export to Europe. They could work on assembling and distributing products uh, for export to Europe. They could work on assembling and distributing products legally imported from Europe. They could illegally smuggle products in from Europe, or like himself, they could just pick up and go right to work in Europe, directly or indirectly, in Morocco or abroad. They were all working for the Europeans. So now he's talking about what he can interpret from them um, about the migrant laborers and what they're doing here. The vision of the homeland operated as a powerful force among Rifi Berbers as the homeland back in the mountains. Uh, they experienced the massive population migrations, economic instability, political tumult, and psychic upheavals that accompanied the historical attempts to subjugate their regional hinterland. This is by the Spanish, but then also the Moroccans after 1956. Yet the people in the hinterland continue to cope with and even resist the domination and degradation of their everyday lives to a great extent by, I would argue, the process of continually reinscribing the land of birth as a critically nostalgic utopian homeland. So this is reinscription. It's a romantic one in the sense that it was part of the larger romantic worldview where an open hostility, even rejection of the present, was combined with a nostalgic attachment to an idealized pre-capitalist past. It was utopian in that it aspired to transform this vision of an Edenic past into an imaginary future, and it appealed to a broad cross-section of the population because it protested against those features of the capitalist present of which the negative effects are felt throughout the social classes and which are experienced as misery everywhere. So basically, they're always complaining complaining bitterly about the degraded state of the provincial capital. Its economic vitality attracted outside beggars and profiteers alike. The cost of living skyrocketed ever upwards. Trust in one's neighbor declined. Even tribal ties were degenerating. This is the modern city. Against the evils of the modern city, they held up an imaginary countryside of yesterday, the Danushit Negni. I don't know these words. This is not Arabic. This another world of purity and goodness back in the old times, back in the countryside. Food was cheap and it was fresh. Women stayed in the home and raised children. The air was clean. Berber spoken was pure, not mixed with Spanish and Arabic. And here we have a vision of the idyllic homeland that sustains the immigrant working overseas. He's scrimping and saving abroad so that one day he could return and become the patriarchal ruler of a docile, respected family, sumptuously clothed and housed, all living harmoniously according to perceived precepts of Islam, and all squarely within a Rifi Berber pastoral milieu akin to the natal village of memory. So this is also common in the third world. Very often, the third world, meaning the formerly colonized countries of Africa and Asia. We'll talk about how things were great, and then the Europeans came and destroyed it all, and now we have to go and rebuild that utopian homeland. It's also really common among Americans, talking about how back in the good old days, which if you're black, you say, "Huh, when?" The good old days weren't so good for us, but even African Americans have some nostalgia for back in the days of struggle, or back in the days of more sort of middle class yearning or working class sensibilities. Back in the old days, it was better back then, and a lot of that is nostalgia, completely just sort of pure nostalgia. I remember going to a Bible study once, and the guy leading the Bible study was using it, but somebody had written it, talking about how in the old days, we were working on farms, and there was not this sort of dis, discrepancy between men's labor and women's labor. Everyone was working together, uh, and in terms of raising the kids, right? This whole idea that dad goes out and gets the money, and mom stays home and takes care of the kids. This is all this is an industrial society sort of innovation, where you have a factory work or whatever. But back in the old days when we were all farmers, dad and mom took joint roles in raising the kids, and took joint roles in keeping up with the cows and the chickens and all that. And I was like, yeah, that's so great. Dad can be parent too. And then I was like, man, that's nostalgia. That's not how it actually was. It was much worse than that. Make America great again. Goodness. So we're having a nostalgia for an idealized pre-capitalist past, bringing the Edenic past into the imaginary future. There's the corrupted city versus the pure countryside. The city is always dystopian. The countryside is always utopian. And then the romantic anti-cultural, anti-colonial nationalism to rid the region of foreigners. So the result is purity. So if the French or the British or the Germans or whoever are screwing up our country because they came in and they stole all of our wealth, and so we banded together and kicked them out. So now we can have purity, and this is really not true at all. Here, let's get back to that important on page 43. So in the third world, at least, the party responsible for present-day misery has usually been identified by one or more of the colonial powers. The desire to recoup the pre-colonial past and the future, therefore, carried with it the desire to rid the region of any foreign presence so as to restore independence and autonomy. As a consequence, the idea of the homeland was shot through with notions of religious, national, racial, ethnic, or at least linguistic purity. This was the case among the Rifi immigrants and non-immigrants alike, who placed a high premium on Rifi Berber solidarity and helped perpetuate Berber exclusivism and isolationism. So, basically what's going on here is a very, very strong conservatism that comes into play, despite them being anti-colonial, kicking the French out. The elite worked to spread the influence of what has been called polemically traditionalism, a conservative ideology developed in response to the Iberian, Spanish, and the French invasions, the resultant destruction and dismemberment of the western reaches of the Islamic world in 15th and 16th centuries. The ideology of traditionalism valued fidelity to a model of the past and a model of behavior that emphasized the cohesion, continuity, and solidarity of the community. So always pushing national cohesion, even when there isn't really very much of it. But that's how Morocco works. Very, very strong conservative ideology, which makes it reasonable that it would become such a strong American ally during the Cold War, when the Americans and the Western Europeans are allied against basically the rest of the world, who are in favor of destroying religion and capitalism and patriarchy and women's liberation and workers' power. And Moroccans are like, no, we don't want that. We want traditional authority. So in all of this, the Rifi Berber identities are really complicated, because they are also somewhat traditional, but at the same time, they are not traditional like the Moroccans are traditional. So there's tradition here. Public drunkenness is not tolerated. In the door in 1921, a man was publicly executed for wounding another local when all were supposed to be fighting against Spain. All the while, immigrants working in Algeria were carrying out long-distance smuggling operations aimed at providing weapons for the region. The Moroccan regime since independence has responded twice to Rifi defiance with violent military repression, 1958-59 and then 1984. Low-level forms of resistance were reactivated in response. Immigrants from the Rif to Western Europe continued in the paths of older immigrants to Algeria by pioneering and participating in all manner of these activities, which have had the effect of subverting complete state domination over the region. State domination meaning the Moroccan state. From Rabat. Economically, they resisted state tariffs and taxes through smuggling, banking abroad, unlawful currency dealings, using illegal markets. Culturally, their strong attachment to this Rifi Berber language impeded the spread of Moroccan Arabic in the Rif, and thus the penetration of local society by all of these bureaucrats, police, educators, and other agents of central government control who just can't communicate with the locals because the locals don't speak Arabic. So there you have it. They are traditional in a different way. Let's pause here because it is 10 minutes and 30.